There are things that once echoed across America and then vanished as if they had never existed. On a hot and tense day in July 1961, in the heavy air of the Cold War, a young man, just over 30 years old, stood before a crowd of thousands at the National Mall and began to speak. His name was Barack Hussein Obama. No one knows why he was there. According to official records, Barack Obama was born in 1961, meaning he hadn't even been born at that time. But an audio recording, torn manuscript pages, and a hidden reel stored deep in the archives all tell a different story. And what he said that day was never broadcast. My fellow Americans, today I do not stand here representing any political party. I do not carry the banner of any organization. I have not come to claim power from one side or another. He paused. His gaze swept across the crowd. The elderly leaning on canes, mothers holding their children, young white men standing beside black war veterans. They didn't know each other, but today they were present together in a moment that had never been announced. I came here, he continued, only to ask one question. Are we truly living, or are we merely repeating the same cycles of fear? The question dropped into the air like a pebble falling onto a still lake. No one answered. No one laughed. No one clapped. Only silence spread. Not the silence of apathy, but something stranger. As if he had voiced a thought everyone had carried in the quiet of night, when the radio is off and all that remains is the breath of a restless conscience. Yet no one had ever dared to say aloud. We, he said, have come a long way since independence. We have built towers that exceed imagination. We have crossed oceans, launched satellites into space, and photographed stars millions of miles away. But we have yet to learn how to look at each other through human eyes. We call ourselves a nation of freedom. His voice began to rise. We sing the anthem hand over heart and say, liberty and justice for all. But how many of us are truly free? How many must bow their heads each morning, not out of respect for the flag, but out of fear of walking the streets in the color of their own skin? How many families live in the same city, but in entirely different worlds, simply because they do or do not have a bank account? How many children, from the moment they cry their first breath, are already classified by the system as likely to fail, just because they were born where there are no good hospitals, no decent schools, no voices to speak for them? He looked down at the pages in his hand, then set them aside. I won't read from the script, because what I need to say cannot be confined to pre-approved words. We defeated fascism in Europe, he said, but we have yet to conquer the prejudice that lives inside our own souls. We once rose to protect the world from tyranny, yet we still have not learned how to truly hear our neighbors when they say, I am not treated as fully human. The wind picked up. A few in the crowd wiped their eyes, not from sentiment, but from something deeper. They felt awakened. America's problem is not that we aren't rich enough. It's not that we aren't powerful enough. The problem is, we've let our hearts grow hard for far too long. The secrets he implied. He paused in the middle of his speech, letting the silence stretch longer than usual. The wind rustled the trees in the distance. Flags in the hands of the audience fluttered softly, and among the thousands standing below, not a single person looked away. At that moment, Barack Obama didn't look like a politician. He looked like a man standing at the edge between truth and silence, and he chose truth. He gently adjusted the microphone and spoke, slowly. Each word weighed as if it carried the weight of a soul. I know there are things I'm not supposed to say, but I also know that truth, if left unspoken, becomes a form of lie that society collectively agrees to live with. There are things people say are too sensitive to disclose. But if something is dangerous enough to be hidden, then it is important enough to be revealed. He looked up at the sky, where gray clouds drifted silently over the Capitol dome. I'm not here to be a hero. I'm here to ask you this. Do we have the courage to face the three truths the world is pretending not to see? Then he slowly raised three fingers, with reverence, like a silent oath. Three hidden truths. 1. On war and the economy. We are taught that war is for justice, that each conflict defends freedom, democracy, and noble human values. But in our time, war is no longer about righteousness. It has become a business model. It's a war waged by men in the shadows, in suits, not uniforms, with blood on their hands, though they carry only pens. They don't walk battlefields. They sit in boardrooms, where each bomb dropped triggers a line of profit. The crowd stirred. Some looked at each other in disbelief, but he didn't pause. He pressed on, unwavering. We manufacture conflict not for ideals, but for contracts. There are people who grow wealthier every time a nation collapses. There are companies that only thrive when someone dies. This is no longer war between nations. It is war between the human conscience and greed that's been legalized. 2. On education and thought control. We pride ourselves on our schools, our blackboards, our degrees. But I ask you, what exactly are our children learning? Are they being taught to question or trained to obey? The audience fell silent once again. Education is not the transfer of information. It is the awakening of thought. But we are teaching children how to memorize, instead of how to wonder. We reward obedience, not the courage to ask, why? A great society cannot be built by obedient people. It must be built by independent thinkers, with inner morality. If all your child learns is how to follow orders, then one day you may watch them commit inhuman acts just because someone told them to. 3. On the universe and human perception. His voice softened, nearly a whisper, yet every word struck with crystal clarity. There are things I cannot prove, but I know they are real. There are frequencies your ears have never heard, forms of life you've never known, and things in the night sky that are not just shooting stars. A shiver rippled through the crowd. I'm not speaking of mysticism. This isn't superstition. I'm speaking of a reality, one you are not allowed to touch, because someone has decided humanity is not ready. There is data that has been locked away, signals that have been buried, fragments of maps that will never be published, all hidden under the label of national security. But if truth is a threat, then perhaps what we are building is not freedom, but a beautiful glass cage we call civilized progress. My fellow Americans, he began, it's time we pause and ask a question that is both simple and profound. Who is writing this story? Who wrote the first pages, the ones where you were born into a neighborhood with no streetlights? Who wrote the second chapter, where you learned to stay silent in the face of discrimination because you were afraid of losing even the little that was left to you? Who is writing the next chapter, the one where you're told to behave, to blend in, to be quiet, and live your life as a footnote in someone else's history book? He paused, his eyes fixed on the television camera, as if he knew that even if this speech was blocked, censored, or cut from the airwaves, someone, somewhere in the future, would find it. And if that story, he continued, doesn't speak of you, doesn't speak for you, wasn't written by you, then why are you still living in it? Do not confuse freedom with permission. Don't think that because you can choose your toothpaste, you are living in a free society. Freedom is not a slogan. It is a daily choice. To stand up, when bowing down would be easier. To speak out, when silence feels safer. To love, when the world calls you weak for it. Real power does not reside in Parliament. It does not sit in the White House. It lives in the choices of each person. When they decide not to bow their heads for a story they no longer believe in. Imagine if millions of Americans woke up tomorrow and said, I will write my own story from now on. No guns, no violence, no bloodshed, just a single awakening. Sincere, irreversible. The disappearance. But the strangest thing wasn't the speech itself. It was what happened after. The address ended with applause, not explosive, but deep and subdued, as if everyone present knew they had witnessed something, not ordinary. Yet few could grasp the full weight of what it meant. And then, the people who were there that day would later recall. They never saw Barack Obama leave the stage. No motorcade, no security detail, no footage of his departure. It was as if he had never been there. Days passed. The media went silent. No headlines, no broadcast replays, no radio archives. The man vanished. His name didn't appear on any official citizen records. No birth certificate, no tax records, no formal documentation confirming he ever existed. And then, time moved on. The 1970s came and went. The Vietnam War erupted and faded. America walked on the moon and returned home. The man who once stood in the Capitol and spoke words that made thousands weep, not out of fear, but because they felt seen for the first time, was forgotten. Until the early 21st century. A young man named Barack Hussein Obama emerged into public life, this time as a real politician. He spoke of hope. He spoke of change. And strangely, his language mirrored that of the man from 1961.
The way he paused when speaking truth. The way he looked into the camera as if addressing each person directly. The way he said, "My fellow Americans," with a voice both solemn and warm. And that raised a question, one not so easily dismissed. Was it truly the same man? Or merely a memory, replaying itself in a different era? A few independent scholars comparing old audio tapes with the sitting president's voice found similarities they could not explain. But like all secrets in history, they were dismissed, ridiculed, and forgotten. As for the Barack Obama we know, he has never spoken of it, perhaps because he doesn't remember, or perhaps because he was told to forget. The final line erased from the record. Years later, a former government archivist, while reviewing sealed raw transcripts from 1961, stumbled upon a document, one not registered in any official system, lacking any approval stamp, and most strikingly, its final line had been crossed out with red ink. It was an unedited draft of the speech Barack Obama delivered on that fateful day. Almost the entire manuscript matched the existing audio recording, except for the last line. That line appeared in no known audio, no broadcast, no memoir. It had been crossed out, obscured, and, as many believe, deliberately erased from history. Yet what remained was still legible. If I am never spoken of again after today, remember this. You can bury a man, but you cannot bury an idea that has awakened. That sentence felt like a prophecy, not just for America, but for every place, every time, every soul that ever dared to speak what others feared to hear. An aging journalist who had once covered the anti-war movements of the 1970s read the line and said, "That wasn't written to be remembered. It was written so it could never die." From that moment on, the words quietly spread through whispers, handwritten letters, forgotten newsletters buried in the basements of libraries. No one could confirm whether it truly was his final sentence, but everyone who read it felt its truth, and that alone made it worth remembering. If you're still listening, I didn't come here to make you believe. I didn't come to prove anything. I simply came to share what was once heard and then forced into silence. You might think this is nothing more than urban legend, a story spun from longing and discontent. But maybe, somewhere deep inside you, something stirred as you heard those words. Not because they were perfect, but because they were real. Because sometimes, the thing most feared by those in power isn't a protest. It's one person, on one day, who dares to speak a truth everyone knows, but no one has dared to say. And that person once stood beneath the Washington sun in 1961, before a crowd who didn't know why they were there, but by the end, knew they would never be the same again. You've just heard a speech that was never broadcast. A voice from 1961. A manuscript never published. And a question still echoing today. Which side will you stand on? The side of the microphone, where only easy words are spoken, or the side of truth, where courage begins and change becomes possible? This speech may never be written in history books, but if it lives again, within you, through you, then history truly begins. From that moment on.